Okay, today we're going to learn about angle relationships. There are 5 relationships that we are going to talk about. First one will be vertical angles, and you need to make sure that you are writing down all of these definitions in your notes and listening to the explanations as I'm going through them. So vertical angles, they are 2 angles across from each other on intersecting lines, and they are always congruent. So here, there's a line there, here's a line here, and vertical angles are angles like this guy and this guy right here. So those 2 angles are called vertical angles because they are across from each other on these intersecting lines. And congruent means that they have the same measure. So write that down too. Congruent means equal. Okay, so congruent means equal. You need that as well. Then we'll go this way here. The next thing you have is adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are 2 angles that are next to each other and share a common side. Adjacent means touching, right next to each other. So here, I've got this angle right there and an adjacent angle. You just make it right here. So you have angle 1 and angle 2, and they are adjacent to each other because they're right next to each other and they share a common side. Okay, common means that both of the angles have that side. Our next one will be complementary angles. Complementary angles are 2 angles whose sum is 90 degrees. So you can take 2 angles right here, and let's say this first one is 60 degrees. Well, what would you add to 60 to get 90? You'd add 30. So an angle that is 60 degrees and an angle that's 30 degrees, they are complementary because they add up to 90. Then next to complementary, we have supplementary. Supplementary are 2 angles whose sum is 180 degrees. So 180 degrees is a straight line. And let's just say we put this angle here. We can say that this first angle, just going to say that's 30. So to figure out what this one is, we know that since both angles, when you would add them together, make a straight line here, this other angle has to be 150, because if you took 150 and added 30 to it, you would get 180. So the other angle would have to be 150 degrees. And then you have a linear pair. That's our last relationship. A linear pair is 2 angles that are adjacent and supplementary. So they form a straight line. Adjacent, again, means they're right next to each other. And supplementary means they add up to 180 degrees. So a linear pair could look like this. You have the 2 angles, they are adjacent to each other because they share this side in the middle. And if you add them together, 1 and 2, they make a straight line there. So that's a linear pair. And you can use these angle relationships to help you to find the measures of missing angles. So we'll do our first example here. Now when you're doing the examples, you need to write down what you're doing. So you need to have determine the measure of the missing angle, and you need to draw the picture. You have to be very careful when you are drawing your pictures, guys. Make it look as close as you can to this. Leave room around it so that you can show all your work. Okay, so now we'll get down to solving this. Determine the measure of the missing angle. If we look at this, these 2 angles, 1 and 2, they are a linear pair because they're adjacent, they share that side, and if you look, they form a straight line. So since they are a linear pair, that means that they are going to add up to be 180. So we have to say, okay, 105 plus what gives us 180? And so what you do, you just subtract 105. Okay, so you know that your angle, and we're just going to call it x, okay? Subtract 105 from 180. 10 minus 5 is 5, 7 minus 0 is 7. So the measure of angle x is 75 degrees. And remember, when you're doing angles, you have to put degrees there. Okay. Example number 2. And we're still trying to find the measure of these missing angles. So you can draw your two lines. Okay, just draw a straight line and then draw one that's kind of at an angle. We have 118 degrees here. And then this x, we can figure that one out really easily because if you look, this makes a straight line. And you can see we have the angle that's 118 and the x. And they're both going to be supplementary here because their sides, they make a straight line. So we have to figure out what are we going to add to 118 to get x. And so the way you can do that is take 180, because you know that's what they have to be together, and subtract off the 118, and then you'll figure out what x is going to be. So we can figure out that x has to be 62 degrees. And the way you can check this is by taking the measure of x, which you say is 62, and adding to it the 118, and you're going to see if you get out 180. So 118, add 62, 8 and 2 is 10, so carry our 1, 6, 7, 8, 1. We get out 180. So you need to always be going back and adding those back together and making sure that you're getting out 180. So now that we know x, we could figure out y, because as you can see, the sides of x and y, they together will form a straight line here. So 62 plus what gives us 118? Well, there's a couple ways we can figure this out. Number one, we could do 180 minus 62 and find out that it's going to be 118. Or you could also notice that 118 degrees here and y, those are vertical angles. So we could just tell from the definition of vertical angles that y is going to be 118. So there were two ways we did that. We looked at the definition of vertical angles, so the two angles that are across from each other on intersecting lines. And then we also used the definition of a linear pair because we could see that x and y, they form a straight line between them. Here's our next example. Now this one is going to be a little bit challenging. We're going to have to figure out a couple different angles, but they've given us a lot of information already here. So we need to figure out x and z. We can see that this 51 degree angle, x, and this 90 degree angle are making a straight line here. So if we added all three of these together, we would get 180 degrees. And you remember, this little square here means that that is 90 degrees. So we already know that this one angle is 90 degrees. So now we have to figure out 51 and 90, what would we need to add to that to get 180? So we'll do 90 plus 51, 9 and 5, that's 14. So 90 and 51 together, that's 141 degrees. Take 180, subtract off the 141, and you will get that x has to be 39 degrees. And now using that information, we can go over here and use that to figure out z. As you can see this straight line, there are three angles that make up that straight line. We have z, the 90 degree one, and the x. Those all are going to add up to 180 degrees because their outer edges there make a straight line. So we know what 90 is, we know what 39 is, what x is. Now we can figure out what z is. 90 plus 39, I'm going to add that together. That's 129. Now we'll subtract off that 129 from 180. And we can see that Z is 51 degrees. And also you can tell here, if you look, you have intersecting lines, and I'm going to highlight them in green now. This line and this line are the intersecting lines. And angle Z and this 51 degree here, those are vertical angles. So we know that they have to be the same. So if you could spot that relationship, you could do a shortcut and not have to do all of this here to figure out what Z is. Okay, and this is our last example, and I'm going to leave this one up to you guys because it's very, very similar to the one that we just did. So you have got to do this one on your own. And I want you to tell me the measure of angle Y is equal to the measure of angle Z is equal to, and then the measure of angle X is equal to. And when you come to class, I need to see that you have your picture drawn, and I need to see the work that you're going to do to figure this out. So don't do more work than you have to. Go back and look at your definitions. See if you can find vertical angles. See if you can find some complementary angles. Okay, look for those linear pairs. That's really going to help you to simplify this problem down if you use that vocabulary. So make sure that you copied on your picture and figure out the 3 missing angles, and I'll see you in class.